Good evening. My name is Kate Mahoney, and I'm the Executive Director of the Naomi Ruth Cohen Institute for Mental Health Education at the Chicago School of Professional Psychology. We're honored to be here tonight with Jeff Zacharias. Jeff is a licensed clinical social worker with years of experience in helping youth and families around issues of raising children, raising healthy children, helping children navigate the issues about sexual identity, sexual orientation, and helping parents kind of guide their young people through changing times. So Jeff, thank you so much for coming tonight.
Thank you for having me here.
And we just wanted to start out, some of our callers in the past have asked a little bit about at what age should parents really start talking to their children about sex and sexuality?
Well, I think that we should start talking about sex and sexuality as soon as a child is ready or as soon as they start showing interest. Mm-hmm. I think it's important to have those conversations early, and it helps to remove stigma and allows the child to feel safe talking about what could be some hot button topics with the parent. So the earlier the better would be where I would start.
So it kind of sounds like you're saying families should individualize it based on the individual child. So you might have a family of 3 or 4 children, and the ages might be different based on their development and their needs and styles?
I think it should be based on every child. And I think that children should be having those conversations. All children should be having those conversations. Sometimes I found that parents who are uncomfortable talking about a child that might be different, or there's some perception that they might be different, will sometimes withhold that information because of the parents' uncomfortability with those topics. So whether it's a large family or a small family, each child should be having the same conversation with caregivers to help normalize the process. And it not only helps the child and the family, but it helps all the children as well.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. So I think it sounds like a little bit what you've seen in some families is people get a little bit into don't ask, don't tell kind of notion. Right. Because of a lack of knowledge or comfort. And you're really trying to encourage parents to get ready, and they can get help places, right? So if somebody feels like, gee, I know this is part of my parenting job, but I'm not sure how to do this, do you have thoughts or ideas about how someone might go about becoming more comfortable or more skilled?
Well, you certainly can reach out to therapists that specialize in working with adolescents and or LGBT issues. Joining a group like PFLAG is always a good option for parents because they get to be around other parents who are having the same difficult conversations, which I think normalizes it for the family then and lets the family know that they're not alone. Reaching out to gay straight alliances. Perhaps the school has an alliance for children, reaching out to them, reaching out to other parents who are in similar situations, and starting the conversation earlier rather than later, because if they start it later, they've missed a whole lot of opportunity to educate and get the child to feel comfortable with the topics and allow themselves to feel comfortable with discussing them.
Mm-hmm. And so they miss out on some key opportunities to support their child through this important time for every human being, right, comes to terms with their sex, their sexuality, their sexual orientation, sexual identity.
Those are all topics that everyone across the board deals with, whether it's parents or children. And I think an important thing, too, is there's a lot of taboo in talking about sex, but this is much broader than sex. We're talking about sexual orientation, gender identity, gender expression, sexual attraction, biological sex. It's not just about sex, which becomes the taboo for people when they focus on that and they focus on the biology of things and can often miss some really key components that will make the difference in having those conversations. And that's, again, gender identity, gender expression, and those type of things are immensely helpful to be able to cover.
So I'm not sure everybody always knows what those concepts even mean. So Can you talk a little bit about gender identity and gender expression and kind of what those are for some of our viewers who may not be as familiar with that terminology?
Well, gender expression has to do with outward presentation. So, and that is not always indicative of sexual orientation. So if a female-identified person would dress in a more traditional masculine sense, that doesn't necessarily indicate that that person is a lesbian. And if a male is to dress in something more female-oriented, that doesn't mean anything in terms of their sexual orientation. And you could think about David Bowie or Madonna, and they often play with gender expression and what that means. Sexual identity has to do with how somebody identifies in a very broad spectrum, and going from male identified to female identified. However, what gets missed is all the opportunity there in the gray, and that's for people to be more fluid and experience all aspects of themselves rather than just this binary way of thinking, which is male or female. And here in the middle is the trans-identified person, the gender non-conforming, the gender queer person. If we don't talk about getting in the gray, we get, the child or the adults get lost in that. So it's gender expression, sexual orientation, which of course is, we go from being homosexual to being heterosexual, and then again we have that binary concept where all the individuals are missed in the middle. Gender identity, gender expression, sexual orientation, biological sex has to do with the biological sex of an individual. But then if it's male parts or female parts, we again miss the gray, which is sometimes where our intersex individuals fall into the category. And then there's romantic and sexual attraction, which is a whole other conversation. But what's in the heart is different than necessarily what somebody's attracted to. And if we're not looking at that in the expanse of a person, again, we're getting caught in this very black and white area, which is what we really want to be, is a more fluid and a broader representation.
And more open and accepting.
Yes, sure.
So do you feel like we've made some progress and where things are maybe a little less binary and it's not just, two boxes to choose from on a form, that we've made some progress?
My hope is that there's progress been made, and in cities like Chicago or LA or San Francisco, I think it's more part of the conversation every day, whether someone's looking for therapy or a support group system or whatnot. I think places are becoming more comfortable in having that conversation. My fear is that in more rural areas that maybe is not part of the conversation quite yet. And that scares me a little bit just because of the number of people that are represented there. And then I think the world is a scary place right now for anybody that identifies perhaps as anything other than a white heterosexual male. And whether it's political or spiritual or whatever the framework might be, it's becoming in some ways easier to talk about things, but becoming scarier to talk about those things because the broad world is or can be not a safe place for people.
So what do you see as some of the risks for someone who maybe is feeling like they are somewhere on that continuum and not at either extreme, and yet there aren't a lot of people in their life that they feel like they can talk to about how they're feeling?
Sure. Well, it certainly impacts a person's physical health. If a person doesn't feel safe in the world, that there's an impact on the mental health, but that also impacts the body. And so we see higher rates of like risky behaviors or STDs or higher blood pressure or things like that go along with the physical manifestation of trauma and not feeling safe. And of course, then there's the mental health aspect, which is often in this community, there's higher rates of depression and or anxiety or suicidal ideations. Addiction is certainly a larger component. And just sort of, I guess, some of the other mental health issues that go along with not feeling safe in the world and a person looking for connection however they can find it. So I guess those would be the biggest areas that I see impacted.
So as you list those, when I think about it, for a parent who's maybe feeling a little uncomfortable, not sure, and maybe even feeling like their child's experience almost is in conflict with the parents' experience when they were growing up or what their religious beliefs might be or political beliefs. I think most parents want their children, though, to be healthy and happy, so that perhaps that would be an issue that they'd find some way to balance out what the way they were raised and what their comfort zone is. But if their top priority is wanting to support and love their child and give their child a nurturing environment, that they might find or at least explore some new ways of thinking and talking to their child.
Yeah, I think what's important to recognize with a child or adolescent that experiencing these new ways of exploring their sexuality or gender identity is while they're doing that, the parents are also having to do that. So, there's a dual coming out process for the child and for the parents, because the parents now have to address what their own biases and whatnot are in regards to sexual orientation or gender identity that may be in conflict with how their families do it or how the parents in their peer system do it. So everybody's kind of walking this same process and having to come out. And I think that's what's important and challenging for the parents, is to be able to, well, this isn't necessarily how I was raised to do things, but in the spirit of my child growing up to be happy and healthy, I need to really rethink what my own biases and stigmas are, and then help my child and their peer group to also sort of challenge those same things as well.
That really sounds like that could be a challenging task for parents, but as I think about the parents that I've known over the years who have experienced some of this with their children, they typically have found a way to get through it as a family, because the ultimate message is love and caring and wanting their child to be happy and healthy and to have good connections. Sometimes when people talk about this issue, particularly with younger children, elementary school, middle school, early high school, there's a lot of conversation about bullying kids who seem different. I'm wondering if you can address that, and then in a moment we're going to go, after that we'll go to what we have a caller. But let's just talk about the issue about how real is the issue of bullying? Is it something people should be concerned about?
It's absolutely a real phenomenon. And the thing that I think is most scary now is that bullying is 24/7, 365, where perhaps older individuals didn't have that experience of having the internet to connect them to everything. But now with things like Snapchat and Instagram and Facebook, people have the space to sort of intrude on other people's space and then take power and control away from them. And then bullying them, whether it's, again, sexual orientation or gender identity. And not only perhaps is the child being bullied, but their peers are, and maybe even the parents too, because the parents are choosing to love and support their child in a different way. Mm-hmm. And it can be very difficult to get away from bullying now. Can be constant. And that's the thing.
With social media in particular.
Absolutely.
Right?
Social media, and it can be anything from walking down the street to being in a classroom to, it could be any variety of things. It doesn't have to take the form of social media. It can be all over, and sometimes it's very covert, so it's kind of hidden, or it's very overt, which is really in your face, mm-hmm. and most people recognize or think is more bullyish, but sometimes the hidden things can be equally as difficult.
Okay. Well, Jeff, let's go to our caller and see
Okay.
if they have a question or comment that
Sure.
Can enrich the rest of us. So, caller, we're ready for you.
Hi, how are you?
Great, thanks.
Thank you.
I just had a question. It's kind of related, but sort of on the sort of parallels what you're talking about right now.
Can you speak a little louder, caller? We're having a little hard time hearing you.
Okay, great. How's this?
Good, thanks.
Wonderful. Well, I'm having the issue I'm having is with my young. She's with me full time, but she invited me talking. She wants to come out to her mother about her lack of faith in God. She's an atheist, and I want to support her in that her mother's family is devoutly religious mm-hmm. and devoutly Jewish, and she's worried about the backlash. She's kind of.
So you're breaking up a little bit, but what I think that you're sort of talking about is this young woman talking to her mother, and who comes from a very religious background, and that the daughter herself does not believe in God, is an atheist, wanting to have some dialogue, and how to do that in a productive way, and how you can then support the young woman in this conversation. Is that accurate?
Correct.
Okay.
Yes, that is correct.
Great. So Jeff, do you have any advice you'd like to give or things you'd like to offer?
Sure. Does your daughter identify as LGBT? Is that what I'm understanding?
No, no. She's straight. So LGBTQS is really the community that I'm talking about, and it's all of us who are just identified differently with a mindset, and don't want people to identify or treat them or tell them.
So you're getting at, I think what's interesting is that really core issue that often things like religion and issues about sexual identity, etc., can feel very intrinsic and very entrenched, and how to handle it in a family when not everyone shares the same perspective, and how to support a young person who might have a different experience or perspective than their parent. So you're making the parallel, it sounds like, between what we've been talking about around a little bit around sexual identity with issues about differences in terms of belief systems about religion, spirituality, whether or not there's a God.
Well, one thing I would say is that I want to honor the fact that you reached out and you're willing to have these conversations. I think that's powerful, and I think anytime we can question our own sort of belief system in support of our child is powerful, so thank you for that. This really is, in a lot of ways, from what at least I'm understanding, it is a parallel process, not around LGBT issues or gender or sexuality, but it is how does my child come out as being atheist when my family or her family is intrinsically religious, and also you having to come out. Perhaps your faith is different than your daughter's faith, so you're having to come out in your own way. And it would be important for you to be supported, whatever that looks like, to find resources for your daughter, and for everybody to be having conversations about it, what it means to be different, and how you can support your daughter in having those conversations with her mother and her family. Could be really quite bonding, and if the two of you just have really intense, sort of deep conversations, can be quite bonding between you two. But I want to give you thanks for reaching out and for supporting somebody who's different and sort of challenging your own belief system, and good luck to her.
And two last things we would add, and then we're going to wrap it up because I think we have another caller waiting as well, is the notion that one is maybe helping to coach your daughter about making sure that she recognizes that when she's having the conversation that she's also honoring the belief that her mother and the extended family has. So it doesn't have to be one person's right and one person's wrong, but just giving the space for everyone to have their own experience and values, and to honor that. And then additionally, and I think, Jeff, you referred to this a little bit earlier, is there's a lot of resources for people. So sometimes families would want to sit down with a counselor, a clinical social worker like you, or a counselor. There's counselors in a lot of nonprofit agencies in the city, et cetera. But there are people that can help guide you through what can feel like challenging conversations. And so the idea about reaching out for support is another great thing.
Yeah.
So caller, we just want to thank you for raising these issues. I think people, the rest of our viewers, learned a lot from thinking about this and the way you drew the parallel. So thank you so much.
Thank you.
And I think we might now have a second caller on the line. So caller, we're ready for you.
Hi. Thank you so much for taking my question. So I wanted to know this, and I think I'm kind of, now that I am the age that I'm at, starting to see it from both sides as my friends begin to become parents, that, from the second the doctor says, congratulations, it's going to be a boy or be a girl, people begin to have expectations about what their children's lives could look like.
Right.
Mm-hmm. And so I guess I'm curious in terms for parents, when a child, comes out and says that I am different than your expectations, how they can sort of measure that against their own ideas for what the child could be when the child comes out and says that another path in life will make me happy. How do parents sort of let those expectations go and continue to support the child?
That's a great question, and I think it's complicated by the fact that people's perceptions, again, are that when my child is born, they're going to fall into some sort of a gender role. And society bases on that whether a boy is going to have blue or a girl's going to have pink, and it's often in gender reveal parties, right? And then as the child grows older, then the parents' expectations becomes much different. And that's where the idea of coming out comes in. And, how do you sort of open your heart and mind to, well, this isn't how I envisioned what my child was going to go through, but it is their path. And how does the parent get supported, and how do they sort of deal with their own gender expectations? And but the child is the expert, and the child knows very early when they're different or when something isn't aligned with their peers. And so, again, parents having conversations with peers or therapists or support systems, parents having conversations with children and talking about gender expectations and gender roles, and all those things need to be occurring earlier. And, there's some grief and loss associated with that, because parents often have an idea, right, as during the 9 months leading up to childbirth, this is what it's going to look like. And when that particular scenario doesn't happen, there can be anger and grief and loss and denial and all of that sort of typical grief process. But for you as a parent or your peers and the children, it's important for everybody to be supported and be talking about, here's what I thought would happen. I recognize it's not happening, so what can I do right now to support my loved ones?
You know what's great, I think, about what you said, Jeff, and I just really want to emphasize that, is that it can be a grief and loss experience, and to also try and be open for people to be able to acknowledge that it is hard to shift gears sometimes. They sort of pictured their life and their family's life on one track, and things are changing a bit. So what we can do as a community, whether we're talking about faith communities, neighborhoods, other kinds of social groups, is trying to support parents as well.
Yeah.
And to realize, sometimes very inadvertently you might ask a friend a question about their son or daughter. Oh, are they dating? Are they,
right.
This whole set of things are going to go at a certain way at a certain pace, and trying to step back and realize that some of those things that seem like innocuous questions can even be challenging. So how do we support each other more?
Yeah, there's all sorts of messages loaded in just pronouns of he or she, and are they dating, and if it's female, what guy are they dating, or vice versa. So it's important for parents and loved ones to really be challenging their own sense of what those things mean. And if my child identifies as different than what my expectations are, how can I support them in everything from language to conversations about sex to peer group support and whatnot? And I think at the end of the day, it really is about just being flexible, being willing to challenge our own notions and say to a child or adolescent, we love you no matter what. And I recognize this is difficult for you, and I want you to know it's difficult for me. But that flexibility can be, to have those conversations can be incredibly healing.
Absolutely. And one of the things I wanted to highlight is at the Naomi Ruth Cohen Institute, we do a lot of both training. We have community conferences where we invite parents and members of the community to come together to learn more about mental health and to go to discussion groups about topics of interest to them. We also offer a speakers bureau. So should anyone listening tonight think, gee, we'd like to have someone come out and talk to a group of us in our block club, or someone at our church or synagogue or mosque, or at a PTA meeting, we want to, again, I will give you our information one last time to wrap up. We are always here on the third Monday of the month in this series, Focus on the Family, and we want to thank you for tuning in today.
you.
And so I'm going to give you the contact information that shows my email address and also our website. So thank you so much for tuning in. And as we go to the overhead, just so you really know how to connect with us, please feel free to reach out. We're here to serve, to help promote mental wellness in the community. Thank you so much for tuning in today.
Thank you.
Thanks for being here, Jeff.
Yeah, absolutely.
We appreciate it.